Good day, everyone. Hope you're all doing really well. There was a bit of a big lie told in the Genshin Impact live stream where the developers came out and said that the broad perception is that we as Genshin don't want to make money, which in and of itself is a bit memeable. And then the developers went on to talk about the materialistic and the idealistic side of the game, and it's just a whole bunch of crap. So let's dive deep into all of that, and let me explain to you why, despite the fact that Genshin is not trying to make money the traditional gacha way, their current model of making money might actually be even more effective. And this is the big lie. The lie that I think is a bit of like a misdirection. You see, in a traditional gacha game, you would be peppered by hundreds of characters, hundreds of character skins, just a bazillion ways for you to depart from your dearly beloved money. And this is typically how the gacha companies try to like make a good offering. They pump you with a lot of content and you have to pay up. But I think what Genshin kind of realized is, well, pay, if we don't pump out a lot of content, then we're not going to have these input costs, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. But also, more importantly, by not giving players decision fatigue, but almost decision scarcity, we can direct their spending habits more effectively. You see, when it comes to the 50-50 system that Genshin pioneered, you get to a state where when you want a character precisely at the hype of the FOMO, when everyone else has the character, that is when Genshin gets you. And that's the deviousness of the 50-50 system. By using depravity, which is such a strong psychological manipulation tactic, and then forcing you to spend, and then you get the relief of, oh my god, now I've got the character. That is such a powerful hook, and I think that is the direction Genshin went on. I think if you now factor this in with things like when Genshin came out, we had the whole pandemic and there weren't any viable alternatives on the market, you can then get a toxic mix where people have spent a lot of time and a lot of money in a game, and now you're hooked into the ecosystem. You see, when it comes to FOMO, FOMO really only works really well when you feel like I can't pass up on the opportunity. But if there are hundreds and thousands of different characters coming out, then it's easy to pass up on some of them. So what is the solution then for a gacha company? Power creep, and that's when you bring out new characters that effectively do what the old characters do, but then what you do is you tailor the new content and the difficulty towards the new characters so that people will effectively be forced into a specific choice. That's that part of the traditional gacha gimmicks. That's what Genshin is doing currently really, really well, which also then once again feeds back into this whole lie that they try to create by saying we don't want to make money. It's like, no, you guys very clearly since Natlan wanted to make a lot of money, but even before that, you were basically cheapening out on the development by not giving us enough content. And let me just be like very, very clear about this. When we started in Genshin Impact 1.0, and I still got all the footage, we didn't have Imaginary Theatre, Stygian Onslaught, or a Teapot even. We had so little content, 120 resin, you were starved. So if you wanted to get an incremental gaming experience where you could just do a bit more, then what was the only way in which you can do that? Well, that was to get constellations on characters, and then you ironically get into the whale trap where by being too powerful you clear the content too fast, so you actually speedrun your way into not having enough to do in the game. I know it sounds terribly ironic, but this is the way Genshin has developed, and now we're in a situation where the roles have almost flipped. You've got so many artifact domains, so many places to spend resin, that it now becomes more efficient for people to go back to the traditional gacha systems of spending on the in-game like store where you get like some resin and some goodies and some mora and some books. I think, for us as old players, it would be unthinkable. Why would you spend money to get mora, from the shop in Genshin Impact? But now, because of the sheer amount of content and content availability, you now have that that is a viable way, especially for new players, to try and catch up to the older players. So what I'm really trying to get at is, Genshin Impact in and of itself, yes, didn't start off as a traditional gacha game, but the psychology and the tactics that they used definitely cemented their notoriety in terms of making a lot of money. And what they've now done, especially now that there's more competition in the market and that things like scarcity and FOMO is not hitting as hard anymore, they've gone the power creep route. They are suddenly releasing a lot more character skins, as we can see. They're releasing end game modes that require you to have a lot of different characters. They're releasing more whale baits with the Stygian Onslaught and the whole, what do you call it, Masterless Star Glitter. And they just so happen to then give you a little bit of generosity by saying, hey, you can claim a free constellation here and there, whatever. We all know that because of the power creep, it's really not going to matter for a lot of people. So basically what I'm trying to get at is, whilst Genshin in and of themselves didn't want to make money the traditional way, they always had the intention of making money in a very cost effective way, if we can be honest. And now that the market and the situations have turned, they've now gone back to the more traditional way. So I do not agree that they don't want to make money. I think that this whole thing was very carefully orchestrated and planned by a team of marketing experts and industrial psychologists. You cannot convince me that the people working on Genshin didn't know exactly what they were doing. Remember, it's not about what you see on YouTube and what we hear from content creators that matter. What really matters to Genshin Impact is what their entire demographic is saying. And the majority of their demographic is obviously a lot of Chinese players on mobile. And you've got to understand that Genshin Impact really did they really did go the revenue maximization route. In any case, a couple of other things that I want to touch on is that the Genshin developers mentioned in a live stream that they've got the materialistic side of wanting to make money, but then obviously they want to have the idealistic side of having a lasting legacy, and they needed to balance the two. And because Genshin is not a traditional gacha game, they had a lot of production cost and blah blah blah. So the developers effectively gave a lot of really fancy excuses to say, hey, this is why we haven't followed the traditional gacha path, but now, because things are changing and we want to make Genshin a very big thing, we're now going to go back to the more traditional gacha route, kind of like with little twinkle stars in their eyes. And it's something you kind of have to call out, because it's clear as day that effectively a lot of the goodwill and the COVID boost that Genshin has gotten is now not really working. They're not really getting as much revenue as they can. And if Honkai Star Rail taught them anything, is that you can get away with so much by doing so little. And this is why Genshin Impact is now falling back to their traditional roots, and this is why I quit Honkai Impact Third. But I can see a lot of the Honkai Impact Third kind of money grabbing things now coming to Genshin, coming to a Honkai Star Rail. But even more so, I think it's also kind of ironic that in justifying the fact that Genshin is now moving towards being more monetization heavy, the developers said, well, hey, the game itself has a lot of production cost and we do a whole lot of other things. And I'm just like, well, that was your choice. It was your choice to build a nuclear reactor for China. It's your choice to have symphonies and orchestras and have collaboration events and all of these sorts of crazy ideas with the Genshin Impact money. The one choice you didn't make is reinvesting that into making Genshin truly an iconic game. So this is the thing where I feel like the materialistic side and the idealistic side has never converged for us as players. And that is why you have a lot of dissatisfaction from a lot of players with the game. And that's why people are so quick to call out the monetization practices, because it doesn't feel like we as players are really being part of this game that creates a cultural legacy. We're just there to fund it, and the way in which this cultural legacy will be created is the way the developers and the marketers and basically the way Hoyo will intend it to be. And I'm afraid to say that I think that is one of the quickest ways for you to get short-term success, but long-term you're not going to have a game that is going to last. And obviously there are some strategies to mitigate this. We spoke about that in one of the previous videos. I think things like the UGC is a very clever way to go around this player dissatisfaction by effectively broadening the audience and the base of people that can now come in, especially with all the Roblox controversies and so on. We covered that in a separate video, but it's very obvious what Genshin Impact is trying to do, and to me it's kind of sad. I really would have loved the company to create a game like a cultural impact with their players rather than having something that's constantly working against our interests, because the Genshin developers know what the problems are. I mean, we all know what the problems are in Genshin Impact, and yet they just don't want to give in. And that's why I think games like Wuthering Waves and some other gacha games, Duet Night Abyss and some of the later newer ones coming up, are so good. It's so good to breathe in like a bit of competition, because by God, these gacha companies, especially Love and Deep Space as well, they've gotten away with murder. The like absolute minimal amount of effort for the maximum amount of revenue extraction. And that to me is the lie. I think that's why the big lie of Genshin not wanting to make money is just a smokescreen for developers to just kind of tell you, hey, from now on Genshin is going to make money the traditional way and you're going to buy into it. And I just find it a bit sad in a certain sense. Okay, those are all of my thoughts. Let me know what you think down below. I might be wrong about all of this, but who knows? I mean, the world is complicated and we don't always have the full side of everything. Alright, thank you so much for watching and keep well. Cheers.